Welcome back to another episode of JDV on Air. You know, we spend a lot of time on this show talking about the boardroom to back row transition. We talk about the courage it takes to step out of the comfort of a climate controlled office and into the unfiltered reality of the world. But today's guest doesn't just talk about that transition, he is the blueprint for it. He's a man who's quite literally seen the ends of the earth, from the frozen isolation of Antarctica to crossing the Greenland ice sheet and navigating the most remote tracks on 7 continents through the Expedition 7 project. He's the founder and CEO of Overland International, the visionary behind Overland Journal, and currently the executive publisher of Overland Collective. Scott is a voice that has arguably shaped the global overlanding movement more than anyone else in the last 2 decades. What fascinates me most about Scott isn't just the stamps in his passport or the rigs that he's built. It's the intentionality in a world that's moving faster, I think getting louder and becoming more digital. He has championed the slow travel philosophy and the tactile, unfiltered truth of high quality print and deep storytelling. He understands the same resilience required to recover a stuck 70 Series Toyota in the middle of a desert is the same resilience required to lead a global media company through a shifting landscape. And I'm saying that as a Land Rover owner. Today, we're going to peel back the layers. We're going to talk about the why behind the wanderlust, as the Germans call it, the price of stewardship, and what happens to a man's soul when he truly unplugs from the grid. Scott Brady, welcome to the show. It's an absolute privilege to have you on air with us.
Thank you, Johan. It's a joy to be here. I've enjoyed our friendship. I had a great time with you on the Overland Journal podcast. We've, of course, had the privilege of your content in Overland Journal magazine. And I would reflect the same sentiments. I learned so much from you when you were on the podcast. You have a fantastic book. So it's a joy to be on the podcast with you this morning.
Appreciate it. Let's get straight into it. Scott, you've always said that adventure isn't a luxury, it's a mindset. Looking back at your time stationed in Italy with the military, was that a moment that the adventure seeds were sown, or was there a specific, I'm going to call it, boardroom moment later in your life where you realized the path you were on was becoming too predictable?
Yeah, I would say that a couple things happened early in life. And for those that are listening, I think that one of the most important things for me is that I was fortunate to have parents that always encouraged me to explore whatever it was that I was interested in, whether it be academically or in sport or even in the outdoors. So I think that was probably the most important beginning elements of what it takes to be an adventurer or an entrepreneur, is to start off with parents that encourage you to explore and to see the world. And so those that are listening, like if you're talking with your kids and they say they want to be an astronaut, say that's an amazing idea. What we don't want to do when kids are forming those thoughts and those ideas and that identity and their confidence, we want to encourage kids to get out and explore in whatever way that they choose. So that really helped me. My parents focused on encouraging me, and because of that, I didn't know that there were limitations in life or in the world until I became an adult. And of course, life has a way of giving you a reality check, but it's great to start off with those considerations. And then when I joined the military, it was a similar thing. The military really focuses on showing you what you're capable of and what you're capable of as a team. So when I was stationed in Italy. This was during the whole Bosnian conflict. When I was stationed in Italy, I had the opportunity to work with teams of men. I was a firefighter, so we worked as a team, and that gave me not only a lot of confidence in my capabilities, but it gave me this initial wanderlust into seeing the world. I had never really left the United States before then, which is common for Americans. We have such a large country, and if you want the jungle, you can fly to Hawaii. If you want the Arctic, you can go to Alaska. So this was really the first time I had ever left the United States. And by the time I was done with my months of tour there, I realized that I really wanted to see the world. I just didn't know how to make that happen. I was still young. I didn't have any money. I didn't know how to make that a reality, but that was absolutely the spark of wanting to see the world.
Love it. We've discussed on the show how life is the ultimate adventure. When you reflect on your first Land Rover Discovery 2, I think it was, which you've called a mistake, I might add, what did that failure teach you about the difference between being a tourist and being a traveler?
Well, Land Rovers are an interesting thing, as you know, and I love them. I have one right now, a Defender, diesel Defender. But one of the things that I love about Land Rover is the entire ethos of the company at the time. So when you think about Camel Trophy and you think about building vehicles like the Defender, even the beginnings of Land Rover was about exploring and seeing the world. And that resonated with me deeply. When I got the chance to finally afford my first Land Rover, I bought the worst one that I could have possibly bought, which was a Discovery 2 with a gas V8 engine, and it was very unreliable. So what it taught me was that if you really want to make travel the priority, you need to shift your mindset from maybe the thing that looks like you want to go travel the world and make sure that you're driving the thing or that you're purchasing the equipment that actually enables you to travel the world. And that leads into that discussion around the difference between a tourist and a traveler. There is nothing wrong with being a tourist. I hope someday in my life that I'm able to be a tourist. I mean, I've been to Disneyland, which is probably the closest that I've been to a tourist in my life, but I hope that I can go and just sit on a beach on an island and drink some cocktails and watch the sunset. There's nothing wrong with being a tourist, but what I have found in my life is that I really wanted to experience everything that a country had to offer, which is not being a tourist. That means I want to experience the challenging parts. I want to experience the border crossings. I want to come into contact with an unmanicured version of that place. And that is really the difference between being a tourist and being a traveler, is that you're not having this set 1 week with a perfect schedule where you've removed the possibility of problems. I actually want to encourage the possibility of adventure, which means, as we both know what adventure means, that's when something goes wrong. So I really want the opportunity to overcome challenges, which is that difference between being a tourist and being a traveler.
I enjoy that word. What did you call it? Unmanicured. I
Yeah.
just came back from an unmanicured experience of Patagonia without digressing.
Oh,
In
that's
my book,
perfect. Amazing.
in my book, Overlanding Through the Boardroom, I talk about navigating the jungle of corporate life. Yourself being a CEO, how do you maintain your wild edges when you're stuck in back-to-back meetings instead of a backcountry trail?
Yeah, that's an interesting one to think about. So business in general is a wild endeavor, especially being an entrepreneur as you are and as I have been for almost all of my life. So I feel a lot of that same excitement and desire and overcoming challenges that I feel in the backcountry that I do in the boardroom. I'm particularly well suited to be an entrepreneur because I have a higher tolerance for risk. And I'm also willing to put in the work in order to hopefully achieve the goal. But that doesn't always necessarily translate into being a great CEO. So I was an effective entrepreneur. I was able to create market segments, and I was able to create a product that I was very proud of. But I always struggled with that transition between being an entrepreneur and being in the business every day and focusing on the elements of the business. So we have to think about that. Are we an entrepreneur or are we a CEO? If we're an entrepreneur, we need to build our business to sell, because the long-term sustainability of an entrepreneur is not always that great. They usually burn out, and at some point they either need to transition to a CEO that can run the business for them, or they need to have a transaction around their business. So I recognize that for me, it's always the uncharted. It's always the risk, the challenges that really gets me inspired and keeps me focused. So when we talk about that wilding, I'm always in a place of wilding, which doesn't always translate as well towards scaling a business. And that's where recently, having sold the assets of Overland International to the Overland Collective, it was literally the perfect transition for me. It allowed me to build a brand that I was proud of. It allowed me to build an industry, or to help build an industry. It allowed me to help take advantage of that white space. But now we have a CEO in Rochelle Croft who is exactly what we need to scale the business. She has the perfect mindset as a leader to be able to scale the business, add employees, maybe compromise even some of the things that I would focus on entirely around the quality of something, to make sure that the business is as healthy as possible and can scale. So that's an interesting transition, and it's something that you know well.
Just pivoting to back to Overland Journal, in an era of digital noise, I think most people's attention span is a 20-second TikTok video. You doubled down on high quality print and authentic storytelling. Was that a strategic business move or personal stand for the slow travel philosophy?
In the beginning, those constraints didn't exist for us because we started, my first business in overlanding was called Expeditions West, and it was really just a blog about my own travels, and that resulted in some opportunities. And then we started Expedition Portal. So at the time, I was a technologist. I was a higher education software consultant. I worked entirely in software and technology and in higher education. So it gave me the time to be able to, and the experience to be able to create a forum and to create a website at a time when that was all getting started. So that was a very helpful thing. But what I recognized is that the things that I valued was the quality of the work. I wanted to do quality work, and I wanted to have people working with me that focused on the quality work. And if the product couldn't stand on its own and have a life and be successful, that was okay. I was willing to transition beyond that. I think for those of us, when we founded the magazine, so Stephanie Brady is our designer. She's my ex-wife, but we still work together and have a great connection. And Jonathan Hansen was our editor at the time. So our focus was entirely on the quality of the product. And I believe that if you make something that you are truly passionate about, that you believe in, so this podcast is an example for you. This is something that you are passionate about and you love doing. If you focus on that, you're either the market is going to accept it or the market won't. You're better off not trying to adapt everything that you do to what you think somebody wants or what you think is an opportunity in the market. And this is my opinion. And of course, it's heavily influenced by survivorship bias. So I've made it to the other end. I finished the game. I won the game. But I do recognize that a lot of times entrepreneurs or business people, they're constantly changing their strategy to whatever is the current thing. And there's times that it doesn't work. But in my mind, I believe that if you focus on something that you believe in, that you truly are passionate about, you'll find the energy to be able to continue to lean into it and to make it successful. So when it came to Overland Journal, our goal was to make the highest quality magazine that we possibly could. And we have been very careful to never compare ourselves to others. We do compare ourselves to our previous self. So we look at magazines from a few years ago. Have we improved? What are the things that we need to continue to make better? And because of that, the magazine has stood the test of time, and it's still a profitable business model. And the same thing that applied towards Expedition Portal, which is our web presence. We put the same emphasis. In fact, it was only about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Tina Overacker, who is our current editor, she got on the phone with me and she said, Scott, I believe that everything that goes on Expedition Portal should be at the same quality standard as Overland Journal. And I thought about it. I mean, what is that going to cost us? Are we even going to be able to produce that much content? But ultimately, she was right. Anything that we do should be at that level of quality. And if it doesn't resonate with the audience, if it doesn't resonate with the marketplace, that's okay. But you're better off focusing on something that you really truly believe in, which is what we've done with Overland Journal. Our goal was to never compromise our editorial integrity. So we've never done advertorial in the magazine. We've never been paid to put an article in the magazine. Anytime we do a review of a product, we've removed as many biases as we possibly can. Anybody who ever says that they have no biases doesn't understand what biases means. Yeah. You always have a little, like for me, I like Land Rovers. They're not the best cars, but I have to be able to balance my love for the brand against the realities of owning one. And that's what I believe has made Overland Journal stand the test of time, is that we've always focused on editorial integrity and the quality of the product.
For the viewers that not familiar with Expedition 7 that you did, you were effectively the first guy to take a vehicle across all 7 continents, correct?
Close. So Expedition 7 was a project that I did with a good friend of mine, Greg Miller, and our goal was to be the first in history to take the same four-wheel drive to all 7 continents. So we took a 78 series Land Cruiser, and we took that vehicle to all 7 continents, including Antarctica. Now, what was interesting is along the way, we crossed many of the continents in that process. Some of them we crossed with the 70 series. Some of them we crossed with a Toyota Hilux, like Antarctica. And then we ultimately crossed Greenland with a Hilux. And what that made me realize is that I had the opportunity to become the first person in history to truly cross all 7 continents from ocean to ocean. And that took me about 20 years of my life. And I actually just completed the final crossing of West Africa just a few months ago.
That's awesome. How do you apply that Expedition 7 logic to your business strategy? Is consistency more important than constant innovation when you're building a legacy?
That's a great question, because I believe that that's one of the key thought processes for a business owner is, do I stay true to the path or do I try to constantly innovate? It depends on the leader, because we all know that most startups and most young businesses, they don't run out of capital. They don't run out of ideas. You never run out of ideas, but you definitely run out of energy. So the thing that kills most young businesses is that the founder finally gives up. The founder finally runs out of energy. So you've got to pick something that you want, a ball that you want to carry through all of the hardships that are in business. So I believe that consistency is more important than innovation. There's nothing wrong with innovating. In fact, if a great idea comes to you or a great opportunity comes to you, there's no reason not to run with it. But you want to be careful of like, oh, this isn't working today, I'm going to try something entirely different. It's very hard on your team, and it also makes it very difficult to gain ground. Because we focused entirely on high quality content and also doing big things. We decided from the very beginning we weren't going to do little trips. I've done some little trips, but I don't know if you found this, Johan, but for me, a big idea takes almost as much energy as an average idea. But the reason why people don't do big ideas is because they're afraid to fail. But the chance of failure is only marginally greater with a big idea. But people are afraid to fail. So they go with the safe path, like, oh, I'm going to do a trip down Baja instead of saying I'm going to go and do a trip the length of the Americas. It doesn't take a whole lot more time. It doesn't take a whole lot more money because you've already built the vehicle. It's only the incremental costs. So I believe that if you're going to do something big, because it takes almost as much resources as doing something average.
Mm. I try not to start a year without having a BHAG, big hairy.
There you go.
BHAG, that's it. The
And
most,
the Japanese have a wonderful concept around that. It's called the Mizungu Challenge, which is this idea that you're going to take on something that actually has a high probability of failure. Because the first thing that it does is it starts to tamp down that ego. We need to fail in order to grow. The number of times that I have failed in my business, I couldn't even count them. We could have 7 podcasts just on the number of times that I failed. But because of those failures, I got used to it. I got comfortable with the idea that something wasn't going to work. And that started to make the ego less of a part of my decision making process and more around my values and the things that I believed in. So I believe that those big, crazy goals like you're talking about are important because we're not always going to succeed. But what happens if we do? It's a
yeah.
life-changing event.
So Scott, what is the most significant recovery, to coin a phrase, you've ever had to perform in a business context? I mean, where was there a moment where the winch was your resilience rather than a piece of equipment?
Well, it started off with the very beginning of the business. We started Overland Journal in spring of 2007, and we all know what happened in 2008.
Hmm.
So we had a huge financial crisis. And in many ways, the world is still adapting and overcoming some of those echoes of that huge collapse. So for me, it was an all in moment. It was the realization that things are very, very difficult. So I literally put everything that I had into this one idea. So the recovery for me was the decision to go all in. And that was the moment that the business actually made the turn, was when I quit my consulting job. I put all of my financial resources into the business and I committed fully to the expedition that is Overland Journal. And that was the recovery for us. Now, we've certainly had challenges along the way, but we never used financing other than personal financing. So we never got ourselves into a spot where we had a bunch of debt or anything like that. So we were able to be very flexible, but that also limited our growth. It limited our ability to scale. So there's two sides to every coin.
Yeah. I recently spoke to a friend of mine, Graham Duxbury. He's a very famous Indy 500 and Daytona racing driver, about the pressure of the track. In the world of publishing, where deadlines are your finish line, how do you keep your team from burning out while maintaining the intensity that you mentioned required to be an industry leader?
Burnout is something that every business owner deals with themselves and with their team. So the most effective way that I have helped my team and myself manage burnout, first of all, the thing that we want to do is give, anytime someone has anxiety, the only solution for anxiety that I have found, and I don't know it all, but the only thing that I have found as a solution to anxiety is action. So we have to be able to take action, but which means that you have to give your team, the only solution to burnout that I have found is agency. So the people who truly burn their people out are the ones that push them too hard, but don't give them enough agency. They don't give them enough control. They don't give them enough control over their own schedule. They force them to be in the office from 8 to 5. The harder that things get, the more difficult that business gets, the more likely that failure is right on the horizon, the more the leader has to lean into agency for their team, which means you stop asking them what they're working on. Like as a micromanaging perspective, you have follow-up that maybe happens every week or two, but you give people the agency to overcome the challenge in their own tempo. The last thing that you want to do is have a team member that is feeling stressed out and frustrated with the business, and then you give them grief for taking their son to a basketball game. That is a bad move. So anytime that you're facing your team with burnout, give them more agency. It's surprising how resilient people are if they feel like they have control over the outcome, or at least more control. So that's been our focus, is give people agency.
That resonates well with me. We've got 3 rules at my company, First Technology, an order of execution, and that is, without asking for authorization, ask yourself 3 questions. Is something ethical? Yes, no. If yes, proceed to the second question. Is it legal? Yes, no. And if yes, proceed to the third one. Is it commercially viable? Are we going to make a profit with this endeavor or action or not? And if it's ethical, it's legal, and commercially viable in that order, you do not require any form of authorization within the company to proceed. Do it and come explain
Awesome.
yourself later.
Yeah. Awesome.
Um, just still on resilience and risk a little bit. We explored something called the comeback mindset with the ex Dakar racer Joey Evans a couple of months ago. You faced some tremendous isolation in Antarctica, and of course mechanical failures in other remote corners of the world. What is the specific internal dialogue that happens when things go south, and there's no one else to call?
Hmm. People that have been close to me have told me that my fear switch is broken, which of course isn't true. I certainly feel fear and I feel anxiety, but it is definitely my personality that the harder things get, the more fun that I'm having. So as long as I'm not facing, the barrel of a gun, and even that after the case in a few occasions has felt pretty exciting. But the reality for me is that I seek that out. I need that in my life. I need to be challenged. I want to feel like that I'm doing something with a team of people or people that I care about where we're overcoming challenges. So I seek that out in particular, and we can develop that muscle. We can expose ourselves. These are small exposures to obstacles and challenges and things. You can even do them if you're worried about what others might think, or you're worried about failure. You can do them on your own. You can go for a little bit longer mountain bike ride, and you can push yourself a little bit, or you can decide that I'm going to take less stuff on this next trip and I'm going to overcome it. Or the next time that the vehicle has a mechanical problem, you decide I'm going to fix this myself in the driveway. Those are little exposures that we can give ourselves in a controlled environment that flex those muscles and get us more capable of doing it when we're in the backcountry. Because as you know, Johan, the reality is that things are going to go wrong when you're on a very long trip. So the more that we prepare ourselves in the act of overcoming challenges, the better prepared we are when it actually happens.
Scott says, risk something you manage, or is it something you embrace as a necessary tax for a life well lived?
That has changed with time. Probably all of those failures, and also the cost that it can have in your life. Being an entrepreneur and taking on risk, it can be very difficult on those that are close to you. I was always gone. I was always pushing. That ultimately cost me my marriage. So those are recognitions that there are two sides to every coin. It would be easy to look and say, that's amazing what you've done, but also it cost me things along the way. And at times it cost me my health. I didn't take a vacation for 20 years. It's only been in the recent months that I have been able to take weekends off. And I'm not proud of any of that. It's just the realization that I chose to make risk something that I embrace on a daily basis, but it also comes at a potential cost. So it is in my nature to take on risk. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that we have to always be mindful of what those risks, what they do in the rest of our life, how they affect our health, how they affect our relationships. And so as a result of that, I have started to make changes in how often I do it.
Mm, mm. The compromises we make for success.
Yes, that's right.
You've crossed the Greenland ice sheet. I know, like my wife, you're also a prolific sailor. Which was hardest, the physical endurance required for the crossing or the mental endurance required to return to civilization and normal life afterwards?
Yeah, the Greenland crossing was the most physically demanding thing that we've ever done. It was, you would think that Antarctica would be much more difficult, but it's interesting. Antarctica actually has much more infrastructure, and it's been done many times. So people know how to do it. People know how to cross Antarctica by vehicle. when we crossed Greenland, that had never been, there was no infrastructure. We had to use a reindeer farm in the south. And when we got to the north, there was nothing in any direction for close to 1,000 kilometers. So it was very, very difficult. We had to fly in all of the fuel. We had a high probability of failure. We also had a lot more physical risk because we had very limited information around the crevasse zones in Greenland, whereas we had really good information around the crevasse zones in Antarctica. So I actually fell into a crevasse. Physically, the vehicle had a lower ground pressure than a human foot does. So we actually had driven and stopped, and I got out of the vehicle and I fell into a crevasse. Now, fortunately, we planned for that, and I had a harness on and I was tethered to the vehicle, but it was a much more physically demanding thing than the sailing across the Pacific was. I would actually say that even though I have such a deep love for overlanding, that sailing across the Pacific was probably the most profound and life-changing experience of my life. It was during COVID when there was so much uncertainty in the world. It was actually the only way I could travel because I couldn't travel internationally. You weren't allowed to. So I got onto a sailboat in Long Beach this was the Kailani expedition with a bunch of friends. And we sailed to the end of the Aleutian Islands, which is the furthest that you can sail to the west in the United States, through the Pacific. And it was absolutely life-changing and one of the highlights of my life. So yes, it was difficult and there was a loss of sleep and there was certainly fear because at one point we were over 1,000 miles in any direction away from land. And near that point, we were in 16,000 feet of water. So very, very lonely, very, very empty space, which is probably what I needed at that point in time.
And no Starlink at that point in time.
No Starlink that worked on the boat at that time. But we did have an Iridium unit and a couple other ways to communicate. So I was able to have limited communication so I could keep working.
In an episode we did with our mutual friend Patrick Craywagen, we touched on living the brand. You've seen overlanding go from a niche hobby to a global lifestyle trend. How do you keep the soul of the movement alive when it's being increasingly commercialized? I mean, just about every camper now thinks he's an overlander.
Well, I guess we could answer that question. You can overland around the world without camping, and you can also overland around the world without going off-road. I choose to do both of those things because I love them. But the goal of overlanding is to explore long distances. It's to cross entire countries. It's certainly intended for it to be done for weeks, if not years. But that's also the nature of progress. For me to try to stop or to become a gatekeeper of what overlanding means, the broader market will define that. But what I can do is stay true to what my values are, stay true to what I believe Overland Journal is all about and what I believe overlanding is all about. So we continue to champion that as much as we can in the marketplace. We speak to that truth every opportunity that we have. But it's also about letting go. I can't control the industry anymore. 20 years ago, I had a lot more influence. Now it's just okay that overlanding takes whatever shape that the market dictates. Markets will always dictate. Consumers will always dictate what is going to work and what isn't going to work. But fortunately, people still buy the magazine because they want those stories.
Mm. You often speak about stewardship. How do you balance the desire to explore some of the most remote places on Earth with the responsibility of leaving them exactly as you found them?
That is our primary responsibility is to the safety of the people that are with us and to our personal safety. So the only time that would be appropriate to compromise the environment would be if life was imminently at risk. And that's something that is true across any country. They'll land a helicopter in sensitive areas to save a life. But that's the only exception to that. After that point, we need to do our very best to leave no trace. We need to minimize our impact. And the reason why we do that, not only is it it feels good ethically to leave places better than we found it, but we actually have a responsibility to future generations. Johan, you and I have been able to go see the world in many cases in its rawest form, where it's not even been influenced heavily by Western civilization. But think about future generations of explorers. Are they going to have the same opportunity to see the places that we've seen if we don't take good care of them and show stewardship and show those governments that overlanders are responsible travelers? We need to be very mindful of not expanding campsites. We need to be very mindful of never leaving trash behind. If the road conditions have degraded, if like in Australia, if it has started to rain, you need to stop or find a different route so that you don't tear up those tracks, because that ultimately results in them being closed. So stewardship means that I am a steward of overlanding for future generations, and we have to take that seriously.
So, Scott, authenticity seems to be your North Star. What is the unfiltered truth about the overlanding industry that most people are too afraid to say out loud?
I think it comes back to that. If anybody wants to be successful in the overland space, you are better off being authentic to who you are, your values, and what you believe. The further that people depart from that, you especially see that in the influencer space. They begin to compromise their values. They begin to seek out confirmation through likes and clicks and comments. And certainly that can help you grow the business. But I have seen far more influencers just disappear because they've compromised those things than the ones that have stayed true to their values, and then they're in it for the long haul. Business is about doing long-term things with long-term people. So anything that you're doing that only gives you a short-term benefit at the compromise of long-term relationships, long-term respect in the industry. The one thing that we have to always be mindful of is our reputation. So anything that we do in the short term that compromises our reputation will have an outsized impact on our ability to be successful in the long term. So that's the thing that I see as a concern in the overland space, is that people are so desperate to gain momentum quickly that they will compromise all of those things. And they won't say it publicly. They won't even admit it publicly, but they know it. We always know it in our heart that we're compromising our values, or we're compromising relationships, or we're not following through on something that we said we're going to do. And ultimately that makes you a flash in the pan.
On the podcast, we spoke to Graham Bell about his transition from corporate guy to camper. I mean, you've seen it all from $200,000 rigs to guys in old Toyotas. Does the gear ever get in the way of the actual experience of being?
The gear always gets in the way. And I've learned that you talk about the failures, the number of times that I've overbuilt a vehicle, I've always regretted it. And you always see the guy who will overbuild a truck, and as soon as he's done, within a few months, the thing's for sale, because they become unusable, or they've put themselves at such financial impact to try to achieve this thing that they can no longer afford to put fuel in it. So in life in general, the more that we can remove complexity and the more that we can maintain simplicity, the better. I have this adaptation of an extupore quote, which basically I say is, the vehicle isn't perfect when you've added the last thing to it. The vehicle is perfect when you've removed the last thing from it. And the only way that we know what we really need is to get out and do. So you will always see that the most overbuilt vehicles are always the people with the most limited amount of experience, or the people who don't travel very much. The more that someone travels, the closer the vehicle gets to stock, or the closer the vehicle gets to their actual needs. So if you're traveling with a family of 4, you're probably going to need a camper or a trailer. If it's just 1 or 2 people in the vehicle, it's surprising how little you can travel with. When I went up East Africa a few years ago, I did it in an entirely stock Grenadier. The only thing that I added to it was a fridge, which of course can be removed in about 3 minutes. And I had a small battery pack that would power the fridge overnight. And I had a little bit of a sleeping platform so I could sleep inside the car, but I could turn that vehicle back to stock in less than 15 minutes. if I wanted to. The vehicle was unmodified because I wanted it to be as reliable as possible. I wanted it to be as low profile going through a city as possible. I wanted to ensure that I could achieve the goal more so than look like I was on an adventure. I actually wanted to do an adventure.
Scott, what does minimalism mean to a guy who runs a company that reviews the latest and greatest outdoor gear?
Our primary objective as journalists is to minimize our own personal bias. So the reality is that there are lots of products on the market that people are choosing to use. Our job is to test them effectively and to provide honest feedback on their performance. I choose to use a very complex and expensive camera. Someone else might be totally fine just using their iPhone. So our objective is to test the equipment and to give the reader an insight into how it performs. And then it's up to them to try to minimize the number of those things that they employ in their vehicle and in their travels. But the most important thing for everybody to know is that you don't need a heavily modified vehicle to travel around the world. The only thing that ever actually dictates modification is condition specific. So, a Defender like you have in stock form, a stock 76 Land Cruiser, those vehicles can easily drive around the world, no problem. But if you want to cross Antarctica, you're going to need some modifications. So the only time that I heavily modify a vehicle is if it's condition specific. Or if the individual likes to do really short duration trips, but very difficult, deep mud, deep in the jungle, you're going to have the right winch. You're going to have the right tires. You're going to have to modify the vehicle in order for it to be able to perform. So it's the important thing is for the traveler to only make the modifications that are necessary to achieve the objective, and then really minimize the ones that don't get you to the end. Because let's say that you're only traveling in the desert, you probably don't need a winch. That's a couple $1,000s that you can spend on fuel, or maybe even extend the length of your trip or reduce the debt that you end up at the end of it. So be mindful of the things you spend money on.
We often look at contemporary masculinity. How has being a provider in the business sense and an explorer in the literal sense shaped your definition of what it means to be a man today? I mean, that's a bit of a heavy question, Scott.
No, but it's an important question, and it's one that's being asked a lot. I think that the most important thing that a man can do is to be open and vulnerable. We've been taught for generations to be stoic and silent. There's nothing wrong with stoicism. It's actually something that I read on a regular basis, but the most important thing that we can do is be vulnerable and talk about our failures, especially with other men. It's this unreasonable standard that men have created for themselves that results in a lot of that toxicity that we experience in the world. So I think men being in open conversation with each other, talking about the things that we're struggling with, talking about our failures, and where we have that opportunity to share with each other, that results in a man, in my opinion, that is better able to lead. Because leadership is not about perfection. In fact, it's an impossible task. I fail as a leader all the time. But when I take ownership for that, when I take extreme ownership for my failures to my team and to the people in my life, when I own up to the mistakes that I've made, they have greater faith in me as a provider and a leader. So I believe that masculinity today, we should all be striving to improve, but not compared to someone else. I don't want to be better than Johan. I want to be better than I was yesterday. So you want to be a better version of yourself. You want to improve yourself, but you always want to maintain as much humility and as much openness and vulnerability as you can through that process. It is an absolutely life-changing thing to do.
So, who is Scott Brady that doesn't have a camera or a GPS in his hand? What does totally unplugged time look for you, especially now that you can take weekends off and there's a bit of me time for Scott?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just finding that out, Johan. I've worked every single day, just about, for over 25 years, and any time that I had that looked like a vacation was an adventure, always for work. There was a few days that I would take off here and there, or if I was sick, probably, which fortunately didn't happen very often. But that's totally new. I don't know the answer to that, and I'm learning. And I just took 3 weekends in a row off. I'm working on I have a historic home in downtown Prescott. So I've been enjoying working on my old house, making changes to that. I enjoy going and working on my sailboat or just spending a day sailing. So I don't know. Time will tell. Maybe we'll talk about it on the next podcast.
Love it. If you could sit down with your 20-year-old self at your first border crossing, knowing everything you know now about business and the world, what one piece of advice would you give 20-year-old Scott?
I would say that one of my greatest regrets is that I didn't include more play in the process. It wasn't that I didn't have fun. I had lots of fun, but I didn't have enough play. I should have scheduled more time in the journey to just go, not even bring a camera, go for a hike, or go and attend a concert, or maybe say yes to that family that invited me into their home when I felt like I was on a tight deadline. So if I was to give myself any advice, 20-year-old self, was it's okay to include some play and to include some non-work time into those experiences. It doesn't have to be a lot, but if we give ourselves those little things, it helps so much with our creativity. So I think I would have been a better writer and a better traveler if I'd given myself those little moments of play. I think that would have been really powerful.
Yeah. And a friend of mine from the States told me 15 years ago, have more fun, take more risk, and be more relevant in somebody's life. Those are the 3 regrets. And he was 20 or 30 years older than I am, but have more fun, take more risk, calculated risk, and be more relevant in somebody's life. Just last 2 questions for you, quicks. We talk about the unyielding spirit of the Dakar Rally. If your life's journey were a race, what stage are you in right now? Are you still in the sprint? Are you in the endurance phase? Are you just on the way to the bivouac? Where are you in life right now?
Well, this is more business advice than anything, but you can't lift. Anybody that tells you should take more time off or more play is good. But if you really want to be successful with your business, you can't lift until you have a big enough team that can do all of the work for you, or that you've achieved the goal. So again, that is very new for me. And the reality is I'm still part of the ownership team of Overland Collective. Clay and Rochelle Croft are some of the most important people to me in my life. And they acquired the assets of Overland International. So I am still very much in the sprint. And I am not going to lift until they have reached the level of success or they no longer require this degree of my effort and time. It is nice to take a weekend off, so I am getting a little bit of balance, but you really can't lift. And so I'm still very much in the sprint. I want to see them make it to the finish line as well, or at least achieve whatever goals that they have. So maybe in a couple of years, I can come back on the podcast and tell you what comes next. But I do plan on working a little bit less. I do plan on spending more time with family, and I'm doing that right now, which has been absolute blessing. So who knows, maybe now that I've crossed all 7 continents, I'll cross the 7 seas. Who knows?
Like it. Finally, Scott, when the engine is off and the campfire is dying down, what is the one question you're still asking yourself about your own purpose?
This will be a little bit contrarian, but it's been something that's been really helpful for me in recent years. I don't know if you've ever heard of cosmic insignificance theory, but it's this idea that it is an absolute miracle that you and I even exist at all. It's an absolute miracle that this planet exists in the vast nothingness of space. So if you look at tiny little Earth even in the scope of our galaxy and in the scope of our universe, it is a miracle that I even have this moment with you right now. So in 100 years, even though I've done cool stuff, and maybe even some of it will be considered a record or whatever, no one's going to really know my name in 100 years. So what really matters to me, what I find purpose in, is what I do in this moment. That I'm having this conversation with someone that I respect and someone that I want to see successful in this podcast, that I spend time with my partner, that I spend time with my dad who's aging, that I need to remember, I need to constantly remind myself, and this feels like purpose to me, is to do the things that I love with the people that I love. And that is the thing that gives me the greatest joy. So kind of get over ourselves a little bit. We think it matters. We think it matters what other people think. It really doesn't. But what matters is the people that we love the most. What do they think? How are they feeling about us? So that I find to be my purpose, to make a difference in my nephews' lives, to give them a better chance for the future, to spend time with my dad. That gives me the greatest joy.
Scott, Brady, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an honor to be on your podcast, and I wish you the best of success with it. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.